Hi, my name is Jenny, and today's story is one from the Ukraine, and it is about a man named Herschel. Herschel is well known in the Ukraine. He lived a long time ago, and he was a wanderer. He traveled from town to town, village to village. He loved to meet new people, he loved to try new foods, and he loved adventure. He was not rich by any means, but he was happy. And on this night, this is when we find Herschel walking. Herschel was walking. It was nighttime. He had been walking from one village trying to find another. His clothes were threadbare. His hat had holes in it. His shoes were thin. His gloves were filled with holes too. But he kept walking. It felt like minus 30 degrees. And he walked and he walked. He also knew that if he didn't find a place to get warm or to have some warm food, he would die. Herschel took his collar, the coat of his collar, he held it tight, he put his head down, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked, hoping that he would see a light in the distance. That would mean it was a house and that he would have a place to stay and food to eat. And as Herschel was walking with his head down, he noticed way in the distance that there was a light. It was a small light, and he wasn't sure if it could be a house, but it was a light. And with that thought, he gained energy, he picked up his speed, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked. And as he got closer, he was so happy because it turned out that that light was a light from a house. And he was even happier as he got really close because he could see that on the top it said inn. So it was an inn. They had to have a place for him to sleep, and they had to have food. He was sure of it. And so he confidently went up to the front door and he knocked on the door. Inside the house, of course, the innkeeper and his wife did hear those knocks, and they looked at each other. Who could it be? Who could be traveling at this time of night? It was not a good thing. Whoever it was not good. And so the innkeeper's wife told her husband, go to the door, see who's there. And if it looks like they can't pay for room and board and something to eat, tell them that the inn is closed. And so the innkeeper did go to the door, and he opened it up, and a big blast of cold air came in. It was freezing cold. And he said to the man outside, what do you want? And Herschel said, my name is Herschel, and I'm wondering if you could find a place in your heart to give me a warm bed to sleep in and some food. And the innkeeper remembered what his wife had said. And he said to Herschel, the inn is closed. And he was about to slam the door. Whoa, said Herschel, don't shut the door on me. It's freezing out here. If I don't sleep, I am going to freeze to death. You certainly must have a barn here that I could sleep in. I'd sleep with the pigs. I'd sleep with the cows. Anywhere, just some straw and hay, and that would be fine. And the innkeeper replied, the inn is closed. And Herschel said, please, Mr. Innkeeper, don't you understand? I won't last the night. I will die if I don't have any warm place to stay and some warm food. The innkeeper started to shake his head and say, no, the inn is closed. Well, Herschel was getting very upset. He could not believe the selfishness of this innkeeper. They had food. He could smell it. He could smell the leftover food. And he knew they had a warm corner somewhere in the inn or in the barn. And Herschel said to the innkeeper, certainly, you must have a dry piece of bread that I could eat. Even something from the garbage. Just something. Anything. And the innkeeper began to shake his head, and Herschel knew what the innkeeper was going to say, and he was so enraged. He couldn't believe how selfish this innkeeper was, and he took the innkeeper by the shoulders and he shook the innkeeper, and he said to the innkeeper, if you don't give me a dry piece of bread, I'm going to have to do what my father did when there was no food in the house. And with that, Herschel released the shoulders, and the innkeeper was shaken. And the innkeeper was shaken by what he had just experienced, and he went into the house. He went into the kitchen, he went into the garbage, and he fished out a couple of pieces of dry old bread. His wife was looking at him and telling him to know what was he doing, and he just ran to Herschel, and he gave Herschel the dry piece of bread. And Herschel chewed very slowly that dry piece of bread, because it was really dry, and he chewed. And he chewed, and he chewed, and it wasn't bad. It filled a teeny tiny hole in his tummy. More would be better. And then he realized that if he had something warm like soup, that would make a big difference too. And so he asked the innkeeper, do you have a bowl of soup that I might have? And the innkeeper, he wasn't quite sure what to do. He wanted to, and yet he heard his wife's voice say no, and he started to shake his head when all of a sudden Herschel grabbed his shoulders and once again said, if you don't give me a bowl of soup, I'm going to have to do what my father did when there wasn't any food in the house. And this time, the innkeeper was so shocked. He didn't know what to do. He was scared of Herschel. He wanted Herschel to go away, and so he knew he had to give him more than just soup. And so he opened up the door, and he led Herschel in, and he called to his wife, and he said, wife, make the best pot of soup that you have ever made in your entire life. And not just soup, wife. Make the best cabbage rolls you've ever made. Make the best bread that you've ever made. Make 3 kinds of bread. And make stew, the most delicious stew that you have ever made. And plus dessert. And so the wife did start making all that delicious food, and the innkeeper helped too. And as they were working in the kitchen, his wife asked, what is it? What happened? You weren't to let this man in, and now he's here. And her husband told her what had happened, and how that he got shaken, and that he had been told if he didn't get food, he was going to do what his father did when there wasn't any food in the house. And they wondered, what could that be? Would he wreck the kitchen? Would he make a big mess? Would he get angry? What is it that his father did when there wasn't any food in the house? Would he burn the place down? They didn't know. They just knew they had to provide the best meal ever. And that is just what they did. And Herschel sat at the kitchen table. He waited for the food, and it did come, and it smelled delicious. All kinds of flavors and smells. And he took his fork and his knife, and he started to eat. He ate the stew. And then he had some bread, and then he had soup, and he had some of the cabbage rolls and pickles. Everything that he could imagine was there. And he ate, and he ate, and he ate. And when he was done, he had dessert, and it was the sweetest dessert he had ever tasted. It was delicious. Herschel sat back. He rubbed his tummy. He was satisfied. He hadn't overdone it. He just ate what he needed, and he felt very satisfied. And wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden the innkeeper said to Herschel, Herschel, that guest room that we had, it has just become available. Would you like to sleep in it? And Herschel took up the offer. How could he resist? And he went upstairs, and the innkeeper and his wife, they went along with him, and they drew some water in a tub and gave Herschel a nice bath of warm water, and Herschel did warm up a lot. And they got quilts, and they layered quilt upon quilt upon quilt upon quilt on Herschel's bed. And he did get in that bed, was all cozy, and he did fall asleep. And he did have a good night's sleep. The next morning, Herschel did wake up early, and he woke up refreshed. He stretched. He felt so good. He hadn't had a good sleep like that in ages, and a good meal and a good bath. He felt good. And he packed up his few belongings. He didn't have much. He put on his hat. He put on his coat that was threadbare. He put on his shoes that did have holes. And he put on his gloves that did have holes too. And he went down the stairs. And he walked through the kitchen. And he noticed that the innkeeper was making pancakes. And the innkeeper did ask Herschel, "Would you like a pancake?" And Herschel said, "No, I'm ready to go on an adventure." And out the door went Herschel. And Herschel walked out the door. And as Herschel walked out the door, he could hear that someone was following him. And sure enough, it was the innkeeper. And just as he was by the gate, the innkeeper asked Herschel, he said, "Herschel, before you leave, I just have one question. What is it that your father would do when there wasn't any food in the house?" And Herschel looked him straight in the eye and said, "Well, he went to bed hungry, of course." Snip, snap, snout, this tale's told out.